So when we're talking about things like resilience, I think, yes, it sucks that we have to be right now, but that is also, I think, when we can look at why hope is something that is resilience as well. Having hope, you know, and letting that guide us instead of, being resilient because we have to, because we're being forced to, but being resilient because we're hopeful for something better.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the IntraCultural podcast. I'm Missy.
And I'm Lucy.
And I'm Alex.
We are three anthropologists who are leaders at a DEIB firm called Willing Observers.
And the IntraCultural podcast covers a range of topics and answers common questions that can be better understood using the concept of culture.
The IntraCultural podcast is brought to you by us.
We do a certificate and a certification. So if you're interested in learning more and become more proficient in the EIB, whether that's to help you in your career development or in your current profession, it's a really updated course where we're talking about and applying all the changes of DEI landscape into the program. And essentially, the goal is that by the end, you'll get a certificate or a certification so you can learn how to create more inclusive cultures in your department, organization, university, you name it. And the main difference between the two programs is that one of them is gives you the foundations and the concepts, and the other one, we help you develop your own strategic plan. And there's additional more resources in a toolkit that comes with that. And what else? Let's say anything else I forgot about the programs, Missy?
No, you did a great commercial interlude though. So we don't need it's like we should have introduced it like the IntraCultural podcast, sponsored by ICS. I like it.
And I did not script that. That just came out of my head like that. So maybe I should go into marketing and
There you go.
Well, let's see. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a 50% discount, a permanent discount for anyone that's been unemployed because of the Trump budget cuts. No, because of Trump's anti-DEI executive orders.
Because of Trump's existence. If you are unemployed because of Trump's existence, although that would probably extend further now that we've had tariff week. So
that is totally fine. Come get a 50% discount. We support you no matter what discipline you're in.
So, Lucy, Alex, how have you been doing?
That's a loaded question. Always. I think I've been all right despite the horrors. I have been pretty good. It's summertime in New York City. The entire city comes alive here. There's a million and one things to do. The weather is atrocious and hot and balmy, but that's also what makes it so special in the summertime. So having fun being with community.
Excellent.
I really like how you turned so many negative things into a positive one, which is the theme of today. Alex is very good at this. But I've been dealing with a lot of technology issues. So if you hear me and then you don't hear me anymore, it's because my internet stopped working. And we have only Mercury retrograde to blame for that. So thank you, technology gods. And good luck to us all.
Good luck to us all. That's and I will counter your balmy and say I had a little taste of it when I went to Denver this week. And I love that you can turn it into a positive. Yeah.
Turn it into a positive for us, Alex. I did not do that. Can you do it?
Well, I mean, I feel like I can only turn it into a positive if I have personally experienced it. But what I hear is that there's great mountains in Denver.
Yeah, they were fantastic. I really enjoyed looking at them from outside, from like inside my hotel room where there was air conditioning. It was lovely, lovely.
Yeah.
Well, two of my sisters had car issues and they're both probably going to need new cars. And I told them, look at it now. You get to buy a car before hopefully everything goes up in prices. So, right side of
There's a,
things.
s- there's a silver lining to everything, you know, if you
Hmm.
are sufficiently delusional enough.
Which we are because we're a DEI and we insist on being
Exactly.
in DEI.
Exactly. Gotta be a little crazy.
Well, I think that now would be a good time to do a few introductions. So usually this is just Lucy and Missy, but Alex is on with us. So Alex, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? We already know that you are amazing at turning things into right positives, but do you want to tell us anything else about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Happy to be here. Happy to be chatting with both of you. I am, like Missy and Lucy, an anthropologist. Not a PhD, but still one of them. And I really got my start in anthropology first at Howard University, which was the best life and academic decision I could have ever possibly made. Um, and the anthropology department, super small class, but it was just rooted in so much community and advocacy. All of our professors were, Africanists, and being at a historically Black university, a lot of the things that we studied were, rooted in figuring out who we are as African people across the diaspora. And, I think that was really, really foundational to me. Um, I worked on a lot of different things after college. I worked for the National Park Service as a historical archaeologist at Monocacy National Battlefield in Maryland. Also did some studies in DC, the Walter Pierce Park Project, and then the Lewis H. Latimer House, Historic House Museum here in New York in Flushing, Queens. But then I made ultimate switch, kind of sold my soul a little bit. Um, I got a good price though to advertising, um, where I was primarily a DEI person, DEI practitioner. Um, and with DEI, and I know that Missy and Lucy can both attest to it because it's kind of who we are and what we do. Anthropology has played just such a pivotal and foundational role in how I perceive DEIB. Um, so in advertising, a lot of what that looked like was additional kind of DEI kind of work, but it also was um, working with our clients and our creative teams to tell stories that are um, not just culturally competent, but culturally humble. How do we uh, really figure out how to best represent the cultures that we are portraying on film and do so in a way with those cultures at the helm of the creative process. And now I'm here and I am very happy to be here and kind of full circle back to my traditional kind of, not back to my roots, but also just the nice little merging of multiple different pathways of my life.
Well,
And we're so happy to have you here. So, a little bit of background on how we came across wonderful Alex and how perfect he was to complement our work here was Missy and someone named Melissa Vogel, who you may or may not have come across her work. She is the host of the Anthro Minute. We have been working on putting together a culture and belonging strategies network, and that's what it's called, Culture and Belonging Strategies Network, to bring together anthropologists or culture-oriented people with DEI. And we were supposed to have done that last year, which is when I first talked to Alex and I said, hey, we want to do this thing. And then because life happens, it barely got launched. So if anyone is interested in that, we'll put it in the show notes. But then Alex and I connected over LinkedIn and then reconnected again. And now he's here. He turned down a job to be with us, Missy. So we should be super excited, extra excited.
I mean, I'm excited. I'm excited too. I think like I said, anthropology is foundational. Anthropologists are my kind of people. We're the best kind of weird. We have very niche interests. And, we're also just, we study everything human. And I think that also, not all of us, makes us pretty good humans. So, in general. So, very happy to be here.
Well, we are ecstatic to have you and to have you here on this episode in particular to talk about something that we are all kind of feeling probably right now. And that's how do we continue to do really good work for the world and take good care of ourselves. And so our question today is, how do we survive and thrive in the current political moment? And so, to talk about that a bit, we're going to talk about resilience and we're going to talk about resistance and how we can think about that critically and practice that. And Alex has some really great insights on resilience and resistance, and so we're gonna kind of hand over some of the leading on this to Alex today.
Yeah, I also wanted to say this is one of the first encounters we had with Alex. Alex was like, let me tell you about me. And he gave us this like really awesome breakdown of a resiliency workshop he had done. So that content is amazing. And so if we can talk about that throughout today, that would be great. If not, there's a lot of really great points to be said about resiliency. So I'll pass it on to you, Alex. Please open us up.
Where to begin? I think first I probably should start by saying resilience is something that I don't want to have to be resilient. I don't think a lot of people want to have to be resilient. I think just, it's part of the human condition to withstand things that happen to us, stressors, etc. Um, a lot of them, most of them, pretty much all of them are out of our control, especially when we're talking about um, maybe health and illnesses and sometimes natural disasters. But in this kind of current moment, when we're talking about resilience, I think it's important to note that these are wholly preventable human tragedies that we are being forced to be resilient against or for. And I think that is always important to kind of ground any conversation about resilience is that one, it doesn't have to be this way. It really does not have to be, we shouldn't be forced to be resilient. But the kind of anthropological definition of resilience is it refers to the ability to adapt to stressors and maintain coherence as an individual, institution, or a system. Also to survive in the face of psychic, economic, physical, or other assaults. And I don't know about you two, but we are being assaulted psychically, economically, physically pretty much every day right now. It's overwhelming.
Absolutely.
And otherwise, and etc.
And that reminds me of some really good research that we can link a few pieces out in the show notes about the fact that we still say the word like natural disaster. that we should change the terminology in many cases to like human-made catastrophes, because the weather itself would not necessarily have the impact it had if there wasn't already some infrastructure and some decision making that led to humans being in a certain place at a certain time, or not having warning systems, or not building houses on a floodplain. Or so, just to reiterate, like, oh yes, oh yes, right, human-made
Yeah.
catastrophe.
And I feel really strongly about that. Like, I don't want to have to be resilient. Just like I get told I'm a strong person all the time. Like, oh, you're so strong because you face so many challenges growing up and because survive so much. And it's like, why do we have to be strong? And yet we value that so much. We say adversity breeds character, and it's like we get stuck in this loop of it's like the resiliency is also part of what's proving our worth. And we're just, how do we stop? Can we stop being resilient? And is that okay? But then if we stop, are we not surviving? Like the theme of the episode. It brings up a lot for me. So I totally relate that it's something we need to do, and yet something that I really wish we did not have to do.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, at the crux of it, you know, like I said earlier, these are fully preventable problems that we are being inundated with constantly. And I think, when we're talking about resilience, like one, it's, should be noted that it looks different on everyone. And it also depends on culture. I am a Afro-Caribbean Black man. I'm a queer man as well. Resilience is cultural to me in a very different way than it might be for other people. And resilience, I think, for a lot of folks from the African diaspora, um, it is taught to us at a very, very young age. And it is something that's ingrained within our cultural practices and how we kind of show up, and also, how we dream about the future,
Mm-hmm.
how it can also almost inhibit sometimes too our hopes and dreams for the future if we are just bracing for impact nonstop. How much
Mm-hmm.
life that takes away. I think that's just so absurd, you know, especially since um, in a perfect world, resilience, like we've been saying, um, shouldn't be a thing, especially when we have a government or an institution that provides us with equity, with basic human rights and human needs. And there's a great um, paper that was written by Elise and Diane Amy Cooper from SUNY Albany and St. Louis University. The paper is called Resilience, Peril, or Promise, Mapping Current and Future Directions in the Anthropology of Resilience. And in that, they kind of outline two kind of ways of approaching any discussion or discourse about resilience. And anthropologically, there's, the analysis of just like the practices, processes, strategies that allow people to thrive and survive in these chaotic kind of moments, as well as the study of resilience as a policy discourse. And in the paper, they say something that I think is really poignant. Um, where one, resilience is the new policy buzzword. And two, that a lot of research on top-down resilience policy and projects provides detailed case studies of um, resilience discourses by government bodies to offload responsibility for well-being onto individuals and local communities. And when we're talking about resilience, especially as the EIB practitioners, I think that is important for us to really note is that we shouldn't have to be doing this in a perfect world. I know we
Yeah.
never are going to get perfect, but the offloading of this responsibility from the government to the individual has manifested in folks like us giving trainings on resilience.
Yeah, that reminds me so much too of like, and I think it overlaps with the um some really great research on like what your democracy is supposed to be doing for you. And you know, the research on the idea of participation and civic service, and that like, you know, it's to your point, right? It's ingrained that this is what you're supposed to do to be a good citizen, but also I'm paying taxes so that you pick up the trash on the side of the road. So now you're asking me to give my labor and participate. And I just did air quotes for people that are listening to, you know, on a Saturday, on my only day off, to go pick up trash on the side of the road because our government doesn't provide those services anymore. And so it's like this, the offloading of responsibility onto the individual. There's some like public health also does this, right? That it's an important thread to think about. You know, I think what the point that we'll probably come back to and over again is that we shouldn't have to be doing this or talking about this. And that if we look at where it's being offloaded from and who it's being onloaded to, that's part of really understanding like what's wrong with all of this, even if we know it's something that we have to engage in if we want to have the kind of society we want to have.
Yeah. And I know you gave the example of the picking trash on the side of the road, but some of the things that are really being offloaded are taking like a mental, emotional, psychological toll on people. So, just to, I don't know if we mentioned this on the podcast before, but really early on in the presidential administration, we were asked to give resiliency workshops, as Alex has alluded to. And it was coming from offices of DEI, whose DEI workers and professionals were so demoralized by the executive orders that they were like, why should we do any of this work? Does any of this work matter anymore? Where are things going? And then we had to go there and train them to be resilient so that they could keep doing the work in the face of adversity. And so it's, you know, yes, it's the picking up the trash that the government doesn't provide services for. But now I'm thinking also all the people who are going to be left without healthcare insurance because of this, you know, big, beautiful bill that just passed. And people in those sectors who are not going to have health insurance are being asked to be resilient, going back to work, taking a course, doing community college in order to get their Medicaid services. Like, why? And the kind of emotional, psychological, and all kinds of toll, physical toll that that's going to have on people. And yet we're still asked to keep going.
And that's what, that's what's just so absurd about all of this. It's kind of like this is a very, I don't know, maybe obscure reference to the literary world, but you know, Camus, his book, The Stranger, he's part of the absurdism movement. And in the book, and I'm very much generalizing, he gets convicted for not killing someone, he gets convicted for not showing the right emotion, essentially. So to me, I think, when we're talking about just the absurdity of, pretty much everything that both of you, Missy and Lucy, explained, is that we're talking about resilience in a way that, and not us specifically, but I think in the DEIB industry often, and also the wellness industry, we're talking about it in a way that misses the point completely.
Mhm.
That, like we've been saying and will continue to say, this shouldn't be a thing. And Missy, I know you brought up, we talked a lot about this, the parallels between, development as well.
Right.
And I'd love to hear, I think a lot of folks would love to hear what what that parallel is to you.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, and the bridge to that is something that we talked about on the podcast too, is like this offloading is also an offloading from the system to the individual, right? So like taking it from a systemic to an individual responsibility kind of perspective, rather than like actually looking at how the systems produce the problems to begin with before they offload them, right, to the individual. And the parallels for this industry and development overall, both in terms of resilience and right, in terms of the entire industry, is the creation of an industry that does not actually solve the problem that it seeks to solve and yet perpetuates itself. So, development, the entire purpose of development, the main driver was economic, and it was right to eradicate poverty, and then two, right, post World War II, to institute democracies worldwide. So it had an economic and a political driver. And, by the time we got to the 1970s, we were busy like eradicating democracies in the name of development. And as far as I've been able to tell, I'm pretty sure we have not eradicated poverty. But the industry just then lived to perpetuate itself, which is really problematic. And DEI, right? What is the goal, right? To create equity, right? To actually diversify different spaces that have historically not been diverse spaces, that have been dominated by privileged groups of people in different places in the world. And as far as I can tell, you know, we haven't done a really good job of that up to this point. And my hope is that this isn't just another industry that is living to offload things and perpetuate itself, for the profit of a few people. So yeah, that is my sad take on those two and the parallels between them.
And
It's
I
a real
don't think
take.
any, yeah, but us being DEI professionals and knowing a lot of DEI professionals, this isn't like an intentional thing. Like we're just going to like fake our jobs so that we can keep getting jobs. Like I don't think anyone is doing that intentionally, right? But we're working against systems that make our work so incredibly difficult, that limit us in a specific kind of way that it feels like the job is never ending. And I guess that's what we're talking about, is what kind of work are we doing and what does it take to create the change so that we don't have to be here all the time.
Yeah, put ourselves out of
Exactly.
right? Like, and I think that's also, to your point, Lucy, the system versus individual. Like, if we were making systemic changes through development and we could and we can access those systems, then we would do more work to eradicate poverty. And if we could make systemic changes through the work that we do as DEI professionals and start really doing that, even if it's at your department level, even if it's at your organization level, then you are starting to do the kinds of systemic work, the larger work that changes systems that, that's okay, puts us out of business, right? That would be fine. I would be thrilled to be put out of business so that we would have the kind of world that we're actually say that we're seeking to achieve.
And
Yeah.
going back to the resiliency, sorry, Alex, is like oftentimes to do this change, there's one person tasked with the job. And then that person is like overworked and doing the job of 20 people, and especially with the budget cuts, we're just going back into that. And then now we're having to have a conversation about resiliency. So it's like, we're in like the circular logic here where we're trying to make the change, getting burnt out, then trying to be resilient to keep doing the change, then getting burnt out. And it's like, how do we get out of the loop?
Mhm.
Absolutely. And Lucy, I think you brought up just, such a pivotal important point, which is I don't think anyone does this work for fun. This I think like we all know what we're getting ourselves into by doing this work. And we know how I mean, I don't need thanks for my work. I don't thrive off of just like, oh, I'm so thankful that you did all of this. Like what we all kind of start this work doing is that genuine change that we want to see. And, we were hired into systems and industries that profit off of inequity inherently. And I think, when we're talking about how we've been brought into these conversations about, resilience, it goes back to, the first points that we were making is that these kinds of this kind of discourses, the people who hired us, I think, were looking for either a band-aid to a problem, or they thought that this was just an individual maybe problem. They weren't thinking about systems per se, which is
Mm.
why I think anthropologists in particular are so well equipped with teaching DEIB, because systems are always in the back of our mind. And we understand that if we don't want to offload the responsibility of equity, of you know, development or resilience on people, then it has to start with the systems changing. And that requires complete and total community, but
Mhm.
also resistance.
Because at the end of the day, systems are made out of people today, right? So I feel like the other thing is systems are not this obscure random thing that exists out there. Like when Missy helps write policy and legislation, she's trying to help change the system. When we're
Yeah,
trying to create a new process for hiring people or having more retention, we're trying to change systems. But to your point, Alex, I think we need more and more people and more buy-in and more of us being in a well enough place to be able to keep doing the work. And I wanted to go back to something that you said earlier that kind of reminded me of like the when you're talking about the industries that profit out of our resiliency or to make us more resilient, like that's us is one of them. We train on resiliency. But the other thing is like so many companies spending money on mental health now and like all these programs that now exist to keep employees mentally well in order to keep going back to work. But that only goes so far, right? You can't mental health away abuse and toxic workplaces. Like you not no amount of therapy is going to fix your work culture. If you have a toxic boss, you should get an attorney and like look for other avenues and look for another job. But I think there's a limit to everything. And a lot of the times we don't realize we've hit that limit until we are broken, until we don't know what else to do and how to move forward. And does it always have to get to that point? Do we always have to achieve that burnout stage in order to reevaluate how we show up for ourselves while we're trying to be resilient?
Yeah,
exactly.
and I think, to kind of, we kind of set up a dichotomy here of like individuals and systems. And so I just want to, I think, clarify because we're going to like then circle back after like, tearing up resilience forever. Then we're going to be like, so here's how you be resilient, right? So let's like, when we're thinking about individual and systems, I think, to Lucy's point too, that like you do have agency and you do have, right, you have things that you can do to change systems as an individual. And, that's one thing that I always train on language because like the way that you change your, ways of speaking and interacting and being in the world can then impact larger systems. So even though we know that we need to take this bigger perspective and that's where we need to have our eye, that, we can do things as individuals. And even though we're like tearing up the idea that we have to do anything with resilience, that, how can we do that with our eye to bigger systems, knowing that like we shouldn't have to do this, but we need to be able to do things for ourselves. So that's, to strike a balance between those two things, I think is part of what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
We're in the matrix still. We're still in the loop.
And I think that's such a salient point too, because I think, we humans are coded for adaptation and survival. That's what we do. We know how to be resilient. We've survived thus far. How I'm not entirely sure, but it's because we are resilient. Resiliency is something that is, very much again, I think synonymous with the human condition. But I think, when we're talking about how do we keep doing this in the face of all of this? I think that's the question that I am particularly, I think, fascinated by. And Lucy, you brought up a kind of workshop or talk that I gave a few months ago on resilience, and what I kind of talked about was how might studying our own resilience in the face of adversity help us identify and aspire to better futures. So the kind of research question that I have is like, how can self-cultural study help us to imagine these better futures? And I outlined a few different ways that people can study their own resilience. And I think one of the ways was, mapping our cultural ground. You know, where are the places you go when you're overwhelmed by what's happening? What are the foods that you eat? What are sayings or phrases? Who do you talk to? What music do you listen to? And I think by one, being able to actually point out on a map physical places, but also map the people and the things and the environments in which you are surviving and being resilient in the face of adversity. I think we're able to kind of really take um, examine our resiliency with a much more, I think my guess is a much more positive lens. Is that we're taking this thing that has been offloaded onto us and we're putting it on a map, and we're able to see like, oh well, I'm doing that. I'm surviving despite all of the kind of mental spirals that we go through when times are hard. Like, I'm surviving this. This is what support looks like for me, but it also allows us to identify what support we may need as well. um, and then the second one is, recording and documenting our stories. Um, and what in this talk, I kind of, ask people to just like record a story that your family tells on repeat or your community tells on repeat, and um, really take a look at and analyze it. Because I think what so often we forget when we're just kind of hearing community talk, neighborhood talk, family talk, is that there's lessons embedded in a lot of those stories. There's so many lessons of our own survival that's embedded within our own stories. About your auntie, you know, somehow, despite all of the problems that are stacked against her, were stacked against her, managed to do something incredible. Those are the morals and the values, and also just like the aspiration as well that are embedded in it. And it helps us again frame our resilience not as a thing that we have to do alone as
Yeah.
well. Resilience to me, and why humans have been able to survive this onslaught of BS, is resilience to me is a community project. It is a community kind of thing. Yes, I'm sure a lot of us can survive alone, but we don't have to, you know. And in our cultural traditions and our practices, you know, it kind of lays out the path for survival, even if we, and I think we just need to kind of take the time to point out those paths to ourselves again.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes me really think about immigrant communities, right? Like they might have come here alone with nothing and yet created a community here in the United States that they became these neighborhoods. You know, you're in New York, there's tons of like little neighborhoods based around where you come from, your national origin, same in LA. And my mom was an immigrant, migrated here in the 80s. And just growing up around that community is like, I don't know if any one individual can survive on their own when they're pushed to their limits and they're pushed to the limits of their humanity. I would really question that someone can survive on their own without relying on other people, as you mentioned, Alex, because I'm thinking, you know, growing up, being incredibly poor, coming as only Spanish speaking parents, you rely on your neighbors and your community to come bring you food, to do tandas. Are you familiar with tandas? If you're a Spanish
Mm-mm.
speaking person, it's like this network of anthropologically speaking, the economic gift exchange. So you do, and it's based on time. So everyone puts in, let's say, it was a means of saving too, especially if you don't have a bank account. Everyone puts in $100 a week, and a different person gets that money every week. So let's say there's 10 people in it, you put in $100, you have to trust that those 10 people are not going to leave you stranded if you're the last person on the list. And it only works if there's community, right? So everyone is getting $1,000, but you individually do not have to wait to save those $1,000. And that's what we survived off, those tandas when we were growing up, because you had scarce resources and you had community. And so again, I don't know if I believe that when people are pushed against their own humanity, that they could survive on their own.
Yeah, and I love that example because it also reminds me of in Haiti, there's this concept called combi, and it's pretty much exactly what you described, except what it mostly does is it's a kind of cultural practice and a traditional practice that um, divvies up labor. So you have your plot of land, you are probably making less to no money. This is subsistence agriculture essentially, but you have to somehow do all of this, you know, kind of harvest the crop. The entire community comes and helps. And then in return, you know, you do the same thing as well. It's the coming together and helping the community and individuals with tasks like, yeah, farming, building, anything that we need, and that kind of collective spirit of what you were talking about with Tandas, and the same thing with Kombi, and a lot of what we're seeing in the United States as well, with the resurgence of things like mutual aid,
Mm-hmm.
with all of these different things, is proof that it is proof of resilience at the end
Mhm.
of the day. We
Yeah.
know how to survive.
Can I make a nerdy point? And but first I'll make a like, white working class communities parallel, and that is um bingo. Like, and you have a community that has, say, a volunteer fire department. That in and of itself is absolutely ridiculous in the world, that you don't have people that are risking their lives to cut people out of cars and, put out fires in burning buildings that are paid, right? They're volunteer. And the entire like fire department is supported by these kinds of community events where everybody comes and like pays money to play bingo, and somebody might win a couple $100, but in the end, right, all of that money ends up going into actually funding a modern fire department with trucks and the kinds of equipment they need and the protective equipment. And all of that reinforces community members for that really kind of you know the need for the community. And here's the nerdy I guess academic point is that a lot of the a lot of the way that we think about economics and that we think about all of these industries comes from a very specific line of theory that puts the individual at the center and assumes that when you have scarce resources that people are going to that all society is going to break down. Um, as opposed to social science traditions like anthropology that comes from a whole nother line of theory that gets overlooked historically, that says no, 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 right? That's not actually what happens when people are in trouble and when we actually do, right? The unit is the community because we don't live as these autonomous individuals, but we end up building communities to support each other in the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think the um the third kind of point that I made in my little talk or lecture of how people can study themselves and study their own resilience is prototyping the future in small embodied ways. So with Canvas, with Combi, with volunteer fire departments, these are actions that are actually rehearsing the future in ways that we don't have to wait for better futures to be legislated. We can practice them right now, and we can do so by you know engaging in community, helping each other, not just helping ourselves, and not just helping ourselves to seconds and thirds. It is, if we want a more just world, then we have to speak up in places where we might usually shrink. If we want mutual care show up without being asked. If we want a freer world, again, speak up in places where you normally wouldn't. Is these little things, practicing the future and knowing that you're doing these because you're being resilient, because you have to do these things in order to survive. But I think when you know, it's very easy to get lost in the negativity of discourse, especially right now, political discourse right now, because Toni Morrison is my idol. I think she was the wisest person to ever walk this earth in so many different ways. And what she often talks about is um, you know evil. It needs a headline. It needs um, fingernails. It's flashy. It needs all of these different things. Um, things like good and hope. These are the things that fly a little bit under the radar often. They don't have the same catchy headlines. They don't have the incessant need for intention in order for it to be sustained. Um, so when we're talking about things like resilience, I think yes, it sucks that we have to be right now, but that is also, I think, when we can look at why hope is something that is resilience as well. Having hope, you know, and letting that guide us instead of, being resilient because we have to, because we're being forced to, but being resilient because we're hopeful for something better.
Yeah. And
I
right? Just having joy, being joyful is also, and I'm gonna shift frame a little and sorry if I'm taking in a different direction, but thinking about it too, one thing that this was, when we've had a conversation before, a point that Alex makes that I love is that, thinking about it as resistance too in the current moment, because people are right now also feeling certain ways because they feel disempowered, like they can't do anything about what's happening. and like, being resilient, being joyful, being hopeful, finding those spaces to take care of yourself, being in community. How can we think of those also as acts of resistance?
And
Yeah.
here's what I was thinking as, we're having this conversation, that when we're pushed to be resilient, it's almost like we don't have a choice, right? We're working off of this scarcity model that it's like we don't have enough and we're surviving. But when we're being proactive about how we are resilient, and we're talking about this community, being in community, finding ways to support each other, finding ways to be more empathetic and thrive. I think that takes that us from that reactive level to the proactive to really get us to be in a resistance mindset. That's where I see the distinction is when you're doing it intentionally to create community and to create and to thrive and to create systems change, then I could see resilience being resistance too, versus just being forced to kind of flail around and not really know what to do.
Exactly. Resilience is not a passive act. It is very active. Anyone who has ever had to be resilient knows how active it is. And, when we're talking about resilience, especially when, you know, it's so often marketed as a skill as opposed to just a human process. We don't really think about it in that kind of terms. We think of it as a very like passive thing. It's just like all of this is happening to me. Like I just have to withstand it. When in reality, it is a very, like you said, proactive kind of thing that we have to do. And to your point, both of your points, that is what resistance is at the end of the day. You cannot have resilience without resistance. And I don't think you should want to have resilience without resistance because it goes, to bring the point all the way back home from where we started. Things don't have to be this way.
Mhm.
And like we were talking about with systems as well, these systems can change. And for the sake of everyone, I think they should, in my opinion. I
Yeah.
know a lot of people share it, but we can solve these problems. And, what I think it's important for folks to kind of think about is just like, how is my resilience helping to change these things?
I love that. And um, can I suggest that that is a fantastic thing for us to close on? Is like, and I think it also kind of brings us full circle because we started this conversation being like, Alex, you're amazing that you have like reframed the heat and humidity and as this beautiful thing. But I do think that like it's a really great thing to end on to say, yes, we can do this. And the things that we're doing to care for ourselves and to build community and to imagine our future, you are doing something, right, as an act of resistance. And, to give people some feeling, to make people feel a little more empowered in this moment as well. These things can change, they are not inevitable.
Yeah.
And they
And give
have
yourself
changed to.
grace.
Mhm.
Give yourself all of the grace while you're being resilient. That's important too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I wanted to say, having done this DEI work from that historical perspective, things have changed, even if it feels like they're not changing. So I know I kept saying we're going in a loop, but it's more like a spiral, I guess. I could edit that out. But there's DEI professionals who've been doing this since, I interviewed people for my dissertation, people that walked with Martin Luther King Jr. And they have those stories, as Alex was saying. People have the stories of how things were back then and how they are now, and who knows where we're going, but it's not going to be exactly where we were. But the struggle is going to continue just in different ways. And it's so important to take care of ourselves, as you mentioned, Alex, and to, I know we didn't get to talk about resting and taking breaks, but to also do that because it's not going to end in our lifetime or probably the kids' lifetimes. I don't say ours because we don't have any, me and Missy or Alex, I don't think.
No, no kids for me.
The kids, just the kids.
Lives.
To the kids. It's
You
no.
know,
Yeah.
that's a great point. You know, like when we're talking about anything, you know, civil rights or justice related, you know, there's the analogy of it, you know, a baton passing from one generation to the other, and it's the same race going back, you know, from you know, anti-slavery folks, and then the Reconstruction to Jim Crow to, you know, civil rights movement to, you know, Vietnam War protests, how all of those different things are feeding into the moment that we're experiencing right now. And we have all of that kind of historical and cultural data embedded within us. And this is just a continuation of that work. And it gets better every century or so.
But the
With
future,
all the kids.
but we can imagine that future and then
Yeah.
work towards that future. And I just, you know, this is not inevitable. Nothing is inevitable because we create the systems that we live in, and we all have agency to do something to make them better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. All
All
right, we can
right.
really wrap up now.
All right. Thank you, Alex. It was so great to have you here with us. And thank you, Lucy. Always great to have you here. And well,
Thank you, Missy.
oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank everybody.
And the kids. Thank the kids.
Yes.
All right, everyone. We'll be talking to you again soon.
See you.
Bye, everyone.